So applying my linguistic dimensional reasoning model to physicalized systems, I came to the conclusion also that uh, the major uh, meta stack of dimensionalities, the one above us, is non-adversarial, non-dualistic, and everything repeats in uneven and even matter. So the one below us is also 2D, is also non-adversarial. And I thought about this. How is this possible? And I also theorized that multicolor spectrums in the meta dimension below us does not exist. And then I started looking at my room. I started looking at the surfaces, and what I noticed is that in our physicalized reality, there is no color where two colors perfectly exist in superposition, right? So two colors or multiple colors occupy the same positional space. And I'm not talking about gradient, I'm literally talking about two colors occupying the same space. Because even my glasses, they are gradient color. There's still a separation between the color, even if it's fading, right? But when you have a super small creature going from one part of the glass to the other, it it will not really have the awareness or the perceptual awareness that where it's at exists two colors, right? If it's extremely like small, minuscule consciousness, 2D consciousness, right? So it means that in the 2D meta stack, and how they see it if they live on a plane, how they perceive everything is as a line, right? So their perception is, you could say, 1D or sort of a 1.5D, because they can kind of do an operation on a line. Let's say if the line is a wall, they can go through it, perhaps, yes. And in their mind, they think, oh, okay, it's therefore it is 1.5D, because we can look beyond the horizon, because they can go there, right? In the same way how we in a 3D space, our perception is actually 2.5D, because we have some perception of depth, limited. Actually, our vantage point is actually singularity, and through the line we can perceive a two-dimensional surface. Of course, there's some matter of 3D if we move ourselves, but if we stand still, right, then we actually see everything as a kind of flat surface, a 2D. So we are 3D beings, but we see things in 2D in the same way that the 2D beings see everything in 1D. Therefore, a 1D being sees everything as a singularity, a point. And so it stands to reason, as a 4D being, you see everything in 3D, right? And in a 5D being sees everything in 4D, right? That is the logical conclusion when you make that that kind of system of dimensionality. And the interesting part is the scaling, because let's say when we have a piece of paper, it has infinite points on a plane, even, right? On that plane, so it's an infinite, like, a 2D being might say, oh, our reality is infinite, it goes on forever, because technically in terms of measurement it is infinite, but maybe it does not. We don't know how big those 2D consciousness are in relation to the plane, right? But it could be every surface that we have in our physical reality is some kind of uh, 2D first, right? If it is let's say a color, or if you have a piece of paper and you draw on it where you have different colors, then the creatures, the 2D creatures that live on these on the that paper for that paper dimension, they actually can have a good party time because they can move in different states and develop as a consciousness. So basically, if you draw on a piece of paper, like like children do with different colors, actually they are the real creators of 2D consciousness. So so it's actually good to sometimes draw some random stuff on the paper, right? And it made me feel sorry for these 2D creatures because sometimes we tear their universes apart. We rip the paper, we throw away the paper in the garbage and it gets burned. So we incinerate, you know, uh, on immeasurable universes. So we are gods for two-dimensional creatures, and we can incinerate the universe to the ground just by burning a piece of paper. Or we can move universes, we can throw universes away. So to say you are not powerful, that's not true. For a two-dimensional consciousness, you are extremely powerful. And that two-dimensional consciousness might think, oh, there's only one God, right? There's only one God. Well, actually, there are many people that can be considered as gods in relation to them, right? So, yeah, wow, that's a big one. That's a real that's ain't no joke. I should say that's no joke. And of course, we cannot see the consciousness in the same way that we cannot see four-dimensional consciousness, right? Because even when you speak of ghosts or whatever, that's kind of not a 4D consciousness because they're just dead people, right? But it also shows the scaling factor. Like if every surface we have in our room a piece of paper, then we have infinite amount of 2D multiverses in our room. Yes, and that scaling factor is unimaginable. Like it's, I don't know, crazy amount. In the same way, the fourth dimension might be so much grandeur in terms of scale that what we consider our universe might just be an object in theirs. Or the omniverses might just be fishes in a fish tank in a greater four-dimensional verse, or what I call the magic verse. And this is exactly what I encountered as well on the running up the stack of the dimensions, where eventually when I came out of the omniverses, it's basically kind of a fish tank where a wizard was looking down upon upon his experiment. Maybe he didn't thought it was like what he was growing there was omniverses, like similar, like when we draw on a piece of paper, we don't believe we are creating anything, just that we're just thinking we're creating a drawing, but actually we're creating a two-dimensional universe. And when you have a book of it, it's the multiverse, right? And with television, in a way, we reverse the process. We invert it. Yeah, we make the movie from 3D to 2D. So we reverse the sequence in that sense. So the scaling factor is something mind-boggling, you know. that our omniverse, it's just an object in a room of a four-dimensional being, right? I mean, this is kind of mind-boggling. It makes us very small, but in a way, an object in the room, a paper, is self-contained power. Um, so that also signifies how time works very, very, very differently across these dimensional stack, because the length of our universe, it's considered very long for us, but probably extremely short for a four-dimensional being. In the same way, like a paper first that we draw on or whatever, a surface, the time scales can be exponentially more stretched compared to the lifetime. Because if you think about it, time can be infinitely stretched and compressed in some sense, right? Um, that also signifies that consciousness, in terms of experiencing time, can be infinitely stretched and compressed in that sense. And so the bigger the consciousness, the more stretched the time is, right? It's like time goes slower, and for the one down it goes much, much faster. So for a two-dimensional being, when we move ourselves across the surface, and the eyes, if they ever had the capacity, the ability to see Emily, I'm doing something, okay? Yeah, so let's say for a I don't know, like a 2D consciousness living on the surface of this stone, you know, for the lifetime of that consciousness, waking hours, or let's say it lives, I don't know, 100 years in that dimensionality, how it sees me is a constant that might be going on, like me with my mouth open, bah, or with my tongue out. That might be the god of that era, if paranormal 2D consciousness can view that. You know, the sages of that 2D consciousness, they see, oh, that's the god. You know, not knowing that there are many people living in this 2D in this 3D world, right? And it makes dimensionally a lot of sense. You can also map it to linguistics and stuff like that. It's just in the linguistics, you cannot really, in the linguistic dimensional reasoning model, you cannot really create the scaling factor very well, because language is linear in terms of scale, right? In mathematics you can, and in physical reality you can. And even that's interesting, because in the spiritual development, there's also this scaling factor, you know, this exponential scaling factor. And like, for example, someone like a master, a spiritual master, has not just is like double the spiritual capacity of a normal person. No, we're talking like you know, planetary scale influences of a spiritual master instead of a normal human. And that might be still small in comparison to a four-dimensional being or a fifth one. So it becomes very comical, you know, to think that we can move multiverses, create, destroy. So just imagine, you can be small, you know, but if you save a piece of paper from the garbage disposal facility, and keep it somewhere safe, you effectively saved an entire universe for eons in their own time. Maybe for billions of years in their own time. Because time can be infinitely more compressed or extended, you know, stretched out. So yeah, in the same way that like a snail moves very slowly across the surface, it will not have the knowledge or the understanding of how fast a spaceship goes, obviously, you know. It's just too fast. So yeah, that I think this is something you can feel bad and good about, that you destroy universes, but you can also create preserve. So in a way, you function as an ultimate being for the dimension below, while you think, oh, I'm just like, putting a paper instead of in the garbage. I put it. I don't know. I just frame it or something. Yeah. So yeah, that's something to think about. It's something that keeps you up at night. Makes you doubt your own significance or insignificance and your place on the dimensional stack. Because when I ran the dimensional stack, the omniverse, which is the multiverses, the budding multiverses, it's a very small thing in comparison to a big man in the 4D. And so forth and so forth, so it's like, and they're interrelated, because the significance starts to flip, right, that the small one actually decides the very big things, etc. So the whole thing becomes self-referential through time, space, and causalities. But still the apparent scaling factor, it is very interesting. And it will be super interesting to be able to communicate somehow with maybe like the God to our reality is not able to communicate in the same way we are not able to communicate with two-dimensional consciousness on the plane that have a very different time experience, right? Like, even if we wanted to, we just don't know how. Well, like, we seem as powerless as they are. Yeah, which, if you scale that up to the stack above and to what we assume is God, it actually becomes kind of interesting,